I was hired to catalog a dead man's secrets, but the first person who said my name inside that house was the man himself. By the time I realized he had been waiting for me, it was already too late to pretend I had come for work instead of war. The rain had a way of making everything look guilty. It slid down the black iron gates, along the stone pillars, over the tall windows of Hart Manor until the whole place seemed to sweat in the dark. The driver who brought me there never once looked at me in the rearview mirror. He just kept his eyes on the road, his hands tight on the wheel, like he wanted to get away from the house as quickly as possible. I understood that instinct. By the time the car stopped beneath the overhang, my pulse had already started a slow, uneasy climb. Not fear exactly, something worse, anticipation with a knife hidden inside it. The front doors opened before I could reach them. No one stepped out to greet me. The house simply revealed itself, as if it had decided I was allowed in. Warm light spilled across the threshold, soft and amber against the rain, and for one irrational second I thought of safety. Then I noticed the silence. Not empty silence, watchful silence, the kind that listened back. I tightened my fingers around the strap of my satchel and stepped inside. The foyer smelled like polished wood, old paper, and something faintly bitter beneath it. Coffee gone cold hours ago, maybe, or the trace of a cigar that had burned out long before I arrived. Tall lamps glowed on either side of the marble hall, but they didn't reach far enough to soften the corners. Shadows gathered there with intention, pooling beneath the staircase and along the narrow archways that led deeper into the house. Ms. Vale. The voice came from somewhere to my left, low, calm, too close. I turned too quickly and found a man standing at the edge of the library doorway, one shoulder resting lightly against the frame, as though he had been there long enough to become part of the architecture. He wasn't old, not by the standards of the stories people told about him, but there was something severe in the stillness of his face that made age irrelevant. Dark hair, pale skin, a watch that caught the lamplight when his hand shifted once against the wood. He looked like someone who never had to raise his voice, which somehow made him more dangerous. "Mr. Hart," I said, and was proud my voice didn't crack around his name. His gaze held mine without apology. "You're early. I prefer to start before people regret hiring me." One corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, more like recognition. That unsettled me more than a real one would have. I told myself to breathe normally, to keep my expression neutral, to remember the story I had practiced on the dry lover. New consultant, temporary archival review, interested in preserving private correspondence, estate records, and historical documents. Harmless, forgettable, the sort of woman a man like him could dismiss in 10 seconds. But he didn't look at me like I was forgettable. He looked at me like he had seen me before and was deciding whether I knew it. "Your resume is impressive, especially for someone your age. I've had practice being underestimated." He pushed away from the doorway and finally stepped into the light. The sentence should have sounded polite. It didn't. It sounded like a warning. I followed him into the library because I had no choice, and because for reasons I didn't entirely trust, I wanted to know what he had hidden behind those composed eyes. The room was vast, lined with shelves darkened by age and stacked so high they nearly swallowed the ceiling. A fire burned low in the hearth, giving the glass doors along the far wall a restless amber reflection. Outside, rain streaked down the panes in silver threads. The sound of his footsteps on the hardwood was almost silent. Mine was not. I hated that. He stopped beside a long walnut table scattered with folders, bound ledgers, and a silver tray with 2 untouched glasses of water. The arrangement looked intentional, too controlled to be casual, as if someone had staged the room for an encounter and then waited for me to arrive and confirm the scene. "Your room is prepared. Dinner is at 8. Don't be late." I didn't agree to stay for dinner. "No," he said, turning toward the door. "You agreed to stay for answers." He left me standing alone in the library with the fire, the rain, and the terrible awareness that the house had not been waiting for a consultant, it had been waiting for me. I looked down at the folder he'd closed. A pale slip of paper had been left behind it, half hidden from view. I slid it out with fingertips gone strangely cold. No letterhead, no signature. Only 4 typed words. "He knows why you're here." For a moment, the room went very still. Then, from somewhere deep in the manor, a door shut, and I realized I was no longer the one deciding how this story began.
The East Wing didn't feel like part of the same house. It was quieter. Not in the peaceful sense, no, this silence had edges. It pressed in from the walls, lingered in the narrow corridors, curled into the corners where the light failed to reach. Even the air felt different, thinner, cooler, as if it had been sealed away for too long and had forgotten how to move. I stood just inside the threshold, keycard still warm between my fingers, and listened. Nothing. No footsteps, no distant voices, not even the low hum of electricity, only the faint, persistent rhythm of rain tapping somewhere far beyond the walls, like a memory trying to break through. This is where he keeps it. The thought came uninvited and unwelcome. Not the archives, not the records, it. Whatever truth had been buried deep enough to require locked doors and unspoken rules. I stepped forward. The overhead lights flickered once before settling into a dull, steady glow. Rows of tall metal cabinets stretched along the walls, interrupted by glass-fronted cases filled with older documents, letters, journals, brittle pages yellowed at the edges. The smell here was sharper than the rest of the house. Dust, paper, and something faintly metallic beneath it, like ink that had seeped too deep into time to fade. I moved slowly, letting my fingers hover just above the surfaces without touching. Control. That was the only way to survive a place like this. Not rushing, not reacting. Every movement measured, every breath deliberate. But the problem with control was that it only worked when you were the one setting the rules. A soft sound broke behind me. I froze. Not loud, just subtle. The kind of noise that could be dismissed if you wanted it to be. A shift of air, a footstep too careful to echo. I didn't turn immediately. Instead, I focused on the reflection in the glass case beside me. Distorted, faint, but enough. A shape stood at the doorway, watching. My pulse didn't spike. It dropped, heavy and slow like something sinking beneath water. "Most people would have announced themselves," I said quietly. A pause. Then, his voice. "Most people aren't looking for something they shouldn't find." I turned. He hadn't stepped fully into the room this time. He stayed at the threshold, one hand resting against the frame as if he had no intention of crossing it without permission, or perhaps no need to. The imbalance settled instantly between us. He didn't need to enter the room. The room already belonged to him. "You gave me access," I replied. "That suggests a certain level of trust, or a certain level of confidence." His gaze shifted, not to my face, but to the cabinet beside me. My chest tightened, just enough to remind me that this wasn't a game I could afford to misread. "Which is it?" I asked. His eyes returned to mine. "That depends on you." The answer lingered longer than it should have. I turned away first. Not because I wanted to,
but because holding his gaze felt like standing too close to the edge of something I couldn't see the bottom of. I moved toward one of the cabinets and pulled it open. The metal groaned softly in protest, the sound too loud in the otherwise suffocating quiet. Inside, rows of labeled folders stretched back in perfect order. Too perfect. Men like him didn't keep chaos, they curated it. "Is there something specific you're hoping to find?" he asked. I slid a folder halfway out, scanning the label without really seeing it. Patterns. Patterns, he repeated, softer now. In other people's lives. In records, I corrected. A faint shift behind me. Closer this time. I felt it before I heard it, the change in air, the subtle warmth of another body entering the space I had convinced myself was mine. "You don't strike me as someone interested in paper." His voice came from just behind my shoulder. Too close. I didn't move, didn't turn. If I did, the distance between us would collapse completely. "That's a mistake," I said. "Paper remembers things people try to forget." "And what are you trying to remember?" The question slipped under my guard. Not forcefully, not directly. That made it more dangerous. My fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the folder. "That's not part of my job." "No, it isn't." A pause. Then, "Your father preferred ink." The words wounded like a fracture. I turned then, too fast. He was closer than I expected, not touching, but close enough that I could see the fine detail in his expression, the faint tension along his jaw, the way his eyes didn't soften when he spoke about something that should have been distant, neutral. "You knew him," I said. Not a question. His gaze didn't shift. "Everyone in this house knew him." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting right now." Frustration flared, sharp, quick, but underneath it something else coiled tighter. Recognition. He wasn't denying anything. He was withholding, deliberately, which meant he had something worth withholding. I stepped past him before I could stop myself. The movement forced a brief, unavoidable proximity, my shoulder brushing his chest, the faintest contact through layers of fabric. It should have been nothing. It wasn't. He didn't move aside. He adjusted just enough to let me pass, a controlled allowance, power given in measured increments. I hated how aware I was of it. "I'll need full access if you expect a thorough review," I said, moving deeper into the room to reclaim distance that didn't quite feel real anymore. "You'll have what you need. That's not the same thing." "No, it isn't." Silence settled again, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was charged. Every movement I made felt observed, not in a paranoid sense, in a precise one, like he was cataloging me the way I was supposed to catalog his records, quietly, methodically, without missing anything important. I opened another cabinet, then another. Names blurred together. Dates, locations, transactions, correspondence. Nothing obvious, nothing careless, and yet, there, a gap. Not large, barely noticeable unless you were looking for something that didn't fit. One file missing between two that should have been consecutive. My breath slowed. Careful. Don't react. Don't give him anything. I reached for a different folder instead, pulling it free with steady hands, flipping it open as if it had been my target all along. Behind me, I heard him shift his weight. A single step. Closer. "You're very precise," he said. "Comes with experience. And intention." I didn't respond. Couldn't. Because if I did, I might confirm what he was already beginning to suspect, or worse, what he already knew. The fire alarm didn't sound. There was no dramatic interruption, just a subtle change, a faint scent threading its way into the room. Not dust, not paper, smoke. My head lifted slightly. So did his. For the first time since he entered the room, something in his expression changed. Not fear, not concern, recognition. That shouldn't be happening, he said quietly. But he didn't move. I turned toward the door, the unease sharpening into something more immediate. Is there another entrance to this wing? Yes. Then why? Because no one's supposed to be here without my permission. The words landed and held. Then, somewhere down the corridor, something heavy hit the ground. The sound echoed through the wing, low and final. Instinct overrode control. I moved toward the door. His hand caught my wrist before I could cross the threshold. Firm, unyielding. Heat spread from the contact, sharp enough to steal the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Wait," he said. Not loud, just absolute. My pulse stuttered once, hard. "There's someone out there," I said. "I know." "Then we need to—" "No." The word cut clean. I turned back to him, anger rising fast enough to almost mask the unease beneath it. "You don't get to decide that." I already did. His grip tightened enough, not painfully, but enough to remind me that I wasn't the one in control of this moment. Not anymore. The air between us shifted again. Closer. He stepped in, not enough to trap me, but enough to make the space feel limited, focused. His gaze dropped briefly to my wrist in his hand, then back to my eyes. "And you," he said softly, "need to decide whether you're here to do your job or to survive this house." The question wasn't rhetorical, and for the first time since I arrived, I wasn't sure which answer would keep me safer. Somewhere in the corridor, a door creaked open. Neither of us looked away first. The tension held, stretched, and then he released my wrist, but the imprint of his touch stayed long after his hand was gone. The door didn't slam. It opened slowly. That was worse. A long, deliberate creak slipped through the corridor, thin as a blade, followed by the faint drag of something against the floor, fabric or weight or both. The sound carried unevenly, swallowed and released by the narrow walls of the east wing until it felt impossible to place exactly where it came from. I didn't move. Not at first. Neither did he. But the stillness between us had changed. It wasn't controlled anymore. It was listening. Then, he stepped past me, not rushing, not hesitating, just a quiet shift forward that somehow pulled the entire space with him. "Stay here," he said. I let out a breath that didn't feel like mine. "You already tried that." His shoulder paused just slightly as he passed the doorway. Not enough to turn, not enough to soften. "Then don't make noise." And he was gone. The corridor swallowed him whole. For a moment, I stood exactly where he left me, caught between instinct and instruction, between the part of me that understood danger and the part that had come here chasing it. Then I moved. Of course I did. Silently, I slipped to the edge of the doorway and pressed my shoulder against the cool frame. The hall stretched in both directions, dim and unevenly lit, the overhead lights flickering just enough to distort depth. Shadows clung to the floor where the light couldn't settle. He was already halfway down the corridor. His footsteps were nearly soundless, but I could see the precision in them, measured, deliberate, like he was stepping through something invisible I didn't understand. His head tilted slightly, listening, tracking. The air had changed. The faint smell of smoke had thickened, curling through the corridor now, sharper, closer. It mixed with something else, something metallic, faint but unmistakable. My pulse slowed again. Not calm, focused. There, at the far end of the hall, one of the doors stood slightly open, just enough. Dark inside, but not empty. I could feel that. He stopped a few feet short of it, didn't reach for the handle, didn't speak, just waited.
The silence stretched, tight as wire. Then, a voice, still careful, low, unfamiliar, and wrong in a way I couldn't explain. It came from inside the room. I felt something shift under my ribs. Not fear, no, this was sharper than that. Recognition without memory, like hearing a song you shouldn't know. He didn't react immediately, but I saw it, the slight tension in his shoulders, the almost imperceptible tightening of his hand at his side. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His voice was quieter than before, not weaker, controlled, more controlled than it had been with me. The voice inside the room let out something like a breath, or a laugh, or both. "That's not what you said last time." The words hung there. Last time. My grip tightened on the doorframe. The air felt thinner now, harder to pull into my lungs without effort. He took one step closer to the door. "Leave," he said. No. Simple, immediate, final. A flicker of movement shifted behind the crack of the door, too fast to catch clearly, just a blur of shape and shadow, but it was enough to confirm what my instincts had already decided. There was someone in that room, and they weren't supposed to be. "You brought her here," the voice continued. "That's new." Every muscle in my body went still. His head turned slightly, not toward the voice, toward me. He knew exactly where I was. Of course he did. "Go back inside," he said, louder now, but still not looking at me directly. I didn't move. Couldn't, because something in the voice had shifted when it mentioned me. Interest, recognition, danger. "That's her, isn't it?" the voice murmured, closer than I expected. A slow, deliberate creak. The door opened wider, just enough for a hand to appear along the edge. Pale, steady, familiar. My breath caught. Not because I recognized the person, but because something inside me did. "You shouldn't let her look at the records, not yet." The word "yet" sank deep, too deep. His posture changed, subtle but unmistakable. The calm didn't break. It sharpened. "You've said enough. And you haven't said anything." The figure shifted again, just beyond the threshold, still refusing to step fully into the light. The restraint felt intentional, controlled, like they were choosing exactly how much of themselves to reveal and when. Just like him. "Does she know?" the voice asked. A pause, a long one, long enough to matter. "No," he said. The lie was smooth, perfect, and completely wrong, because he had told me things, not directly, not clearly, but enough. Enough to crack something open, enough to make me question everything I thought I knew about why I was here. "Then she's more dangerous than you think," the voice replied. Something inside my chest tightened, slow and heavy. Not fear, something worse. The feeling of being positioned, without consent, in a game I couldn't see the rules of. "Or less," he said. A beat, and then the figure inside the room stepped forward. Not fully, but enough. Light caught the edge of a face, just the outline, the angle of a jaw, the faint shadow of eyes that seemed to fix directly on me despite the distance. And in that single fractured second, everything tilted. Not because I recognized them, but because of what they held. A folder, worn, familiar, too familiar. My stomach dropped. I knew that file. I hadn't seen it yet, but I knew it, in the way you know something that's been circling your life for years without ever landing. "That's what she came for, isn't it?" the voice said. His silence answered. The figure's head tilted slightly, considering. Then, a soft exhale. "Then you've already lost control." The words didn't sound like a threat. They sounded like a conclusion, and that was far more dangerous. I stepped forward before I could stop myself.
Just one step, but it was enough. The floor creaked beneath my weight. The sound shattered the moment. His head turned fully this time. Our eyes met across the distance, and for the first time since I arrived, he didn't look in control. Not completely. Not anymore. Go back, he said. But the command didn't land the same way it had before, because now I knew something had shifted, irreversibly. I didn't move, neither did he, and in the space between us the truth began to surface, slow, dangerous, impossible to stop. The figure in the doorway smiled. I couldn't see it clearly, but I felt it. You should ask him, the voice said softly, what really happened to your father. The world narrowed, sound dulled, the air turned cold against my skin. I didn't look away from him, didn't blink, didn't breathe, because suddenly this wasn't about the job, or the house, or even the file. It was about him, and whatever he had buried deep enough to think it would never come back. Ask him, the voice repeated. A pause. Then the door slammed, hard, final. The echo tore through the corridor, rattling the lights overhead. Silence followed, heavy, unforgiving. And in that silence, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to consider before. I hadn't come here to uncover the truth. I had been led here to collide with it. The silence after the door slammed didn't fade. It settled. Heavy, deliberate, like something had just been decided without either of us being asked. I didn't move, not because I couldn't, because I knew, instinctively, that the moment I did, something irreversible would follow. He stood at the center of the corridor, shoulders squared, gaze fixed somewhere past me now, not avoiding, not confronting, calculating, always calculating. The overhead light above us flickered once, twice, then steadied, casting a colder tone across his face. It stripped away whatever softness the firelight downstairs had given him, left only angles, control, distance. I hated how much I noticed. Say it, I said. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. He didn't respond. Not immediately. The pause stretched just long enough to feel intentional, like he was choosing which version of the truth to offer, or whether to offer one at all. I took a step toward him. The floor creaked again, louder this time. It didn't matter. Don't decide for me what I can handle, I added, quieter now. His eyes shifted back to mine. There it was again, that look, not surprise, recognition, like he had been expecting this moment, just not this soon. You shouldn't listen to voices you don't understand. I understand enough. Do you? The question landed differently than before, less controlled, sharper. I closed the distance between us before I could reconsider it, not close enough to touch, but close enough that the space between us felt intentional instead of accidental. You knew him, I said. That's not speculation, that's fact. A breath. Slow, measured. I knew a lot of people. Not like that. My pulse beat harder now, but not faster. Each thud landed with weight, pressing the moment forward instead of scattering it. Stop redirecting, I said. Something flickered behind his eyes. Annoyance, or maybe something closer to respect. Dangerous either way. The rain outside intensified, hitting the windows somewhere beyond the corridor with a steady, relentless rhythm. It filled the silence between us, but didn't soften it. Nothing could soften this. You came here for a file, he said. Yes. And now you're asking questions that have nothing to do with your contract. They have everything to do with it. His jaw tightened. Barely, but I saw it. You don't know what you're stepping into. And you do? A pause. Then, yes. The honesty of it landed harder than any lie could have. I felt it under my ribs again, that subtle fracture spreading wider. Then explain it, I said. His gaze dropped for a fraction of a second, not to the floor, to my hand, still empty, still not holding the file I had come here to find. When his eyes lifted again, something had shifted. Not gone, not broken, but exposed, just enough to matter. Your father didn't disappear, he said. The words didn't echo. They sank. Slow, heavy, final. My breath stalled somewhere between inhale and understanding. I know that, I said, quieter now. No, he replied. You don't. The corridor seemed to narrow, the walls closer, the air tighter. What does that mean? I asked. He stepped forward. Just one step, but it erased the careful distance I had been holding on to. Now, if I reached out, I would touch him. The thought came uninvited, stayed longer than it should have. He wasn't supposed to be involved, he said. In what? His silence answered again, but this time it wasn't avoidance, it was calculation, choosing the least dangerous truth. There are records in this house that don't belong to history, they belong to leverage. A faint chill slid down my spine. Leverage over who? His eyes held mine. Anyone who thinks they're safe. The implications settled between us. Slow, precise, unavoidable. And my father? I pressed. Another pause. Then he made a mistake. The words hit wrong, not because of what they said, because of how they sounded. Too controlled, too practiced, like something repeated enough times to become easier to believe. I shook my head once. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters. No, it's the only one that protects you. That did it. Something cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. His composure didn't disappear, it shifted, sharpened into something more dangerous. You think this is about me? He said. I think everything in this house is about you. Then you're already misreading it. His voice dropped, lower, closer, not louder, but harder to ignore. This house existed long before I controlled it, and it will exist long after. Then who was in that room? Silence. Real silence this time. Not controlled, not measured. A beat passed. Then another. The air between us tightened until it felt like it might snap. I asked you something, I said, and I heard you. Then answer me. His gaze didn't waver, but something behind it did. A hesitation. Small, but real. That wasn't supposed to happen tonight. That's not an answer. No, he agreed. It isn't. Frustration surged, sharp, immediate, but underneath it something colder began to take shape. Understanding. Not full, not clear, but enough to shift the ground beneath me. You let me in here, I said slowly. Yes. You knew I was looking for something. Yes. You knew it was connected to him. A pause. Then, yes. That word landed like a verdict. My chest tightened, not from fear, from something else, something dangerously close to realization. So this isn't coincidence, I said slowly. No. Then what is it? His gaze held mine, unflinching now, unhidden. It's a choice, he said. The word echoed, not in the space around us, inside me. A choice, not mine, his. Why? I asked. The question came out softer than I intended, more exposed, more personal. And that was a mistake, because he stepped closer again, close enough now that I could feel the heat of him, steady and controlled, cutting through the cold tension that had settled in the corridor, close enough that the space between us felt deliberate and fragile. Because you were going to come here anyway, he said. My breath caught. You don't know that. I do. How? His eyes searched mine, not quickly, not carelessly, carefully, like he was looking for something he hadn't decided to reveal. Your father didn't disappear, he said slowly. then say clearly, "You think you chose this moment, this job, this timing." A slight tilt of his head. "You didn't." The air shifted again, closer, tighter, dangerous. "Then who did?" I asked. His arm lifted, slow, deliberate, and for a second I thought he was going to touch me, not accidentally, not briefly, intentionally. My breath caught again, but he stopped just short, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his skin without contact, close enough that the absence of touch felt louder than contact ever could. "Ask yourself," he said softly, "why that file was missing." The words hit deeper than anything he'd said, because I already knew the answer, or part of it. It hadn't been lost. It had been taken, moved, used. "And why," he continued, voice lower now, "it showed up tonight." The corridor seemed to tilt again. The memory snapped into place. The figure, the file, the timing. This wasn't intrusion. This was orchestration. Careful, intentional, layered. And suddenly, the most dangerous thought of all surfaced. "What if I wasn't the one looking for it?" I said. His gaze sharpened. There, that was it. That was the moment something shifted completely. "Yes," he said quietly. "Not agreement, acknowledgement." And that was worse, because it meant I was right. A distant sound echoed again through the house, farther this time. A door or something heavier, moving, closing, resetting, like whatever had just happened was only the beginning. Neither of us moved, neither of us spoke, but the distance between us had changed, not physically, something deeper, more dangerous. Trust had entered the room. Not clean, not safe, but real enough to matter. And in this house, that made it the most fragile thing of all.
The house exhaled, not loudly, not all at once, but slowly, like it had been holding something back and had finally decided to let it go. The corridor felt different now. The same walls, the same dim lights, the same faint smell of smoke still lingering in the air, but something had shifted beneath it all. Not safety, never that. Something quieter, more dangerous. Awareness. He stepped back first, just enough to break the fragile closeness that had formed between us, but not enough to restore the distance we had before. That was gone now. Whatever line had existed between employer and intruder, stranger and threat, had blurred into something neither of us could clearly define or control. "You should go back to your room," he said. The words sounded like an ending. They weren't. I didn't move. "Is that an order?" I asked. A pause, then, "No." Honest. Again, too honest. "Then it's a suggestion," I said. "Yes." I held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary, long enough to feel the weight of everything unsaid pressing between us, long enough to understand that leaving now wouldn't reset anything. It would only postpone it. I turned away first, not because I wanted to, because staying would have meant stepping further into something I didn't fully understand yet. And that was how people lost control in places like this. The walk back through the house felt longer than it should have. Every sound carried, the faint creak of the staircase beneath my steps, the distant ticking of a clock somewhere deeper inside the manor, the soft, almost imperceptible hum of electricity returning to spaces that had gone quiet. The house was awake now. Or maybe it had always been. My room waited exactly as he had said it would. Untouched, composed, too perfect to belong to someone who wasn't supposed to stay long. The lamp near the window cast a warm pool of light across the bed, contrasting sharply with the cold darkness pressing against the glass beyond.
Rain still traced slow, uneven paths down the window pane. I closed the door behind me, locked it, then stood there for a moment longer than necessary, my hand still resting on the handle as if I expected it to move on its own. It didn't. Of course it didn't. I exhaled slowly and crossed the room. The silence here was different from the east wing, less sharp but no less watchful. I set my satchel on the desk and opened it, pulling out the notes I had brought with me, names, dates, fragments of a past I had spent years trying to piece together from absence. It all felt smaller now, incomplete, like I had been working with shadows of something much larger. My fingers hovered over the pages, then stilled, because something didn't belong. A new paper, folded once, tucked neatly between my notes. My pulse didn't spike, it tightened, slow, heavy. I didn't remember putting it there. Carefully, I unfolded it. No letterhead, no signature, just typed words, the same as before, but different. "You're asking the wrong question." A faint chill slid down my spine. I read it again, then again. The words didn't change, but their meaning did. Not what happened to him, not where did he go. Wrong question. My mind shifted, reframed. What if? A soft sound interrupted the thought. Behind me. I turned slowly. The door was still closed, still locked, but something had changed. The air, subtle, almost unnoticeable, except the faint scent, not smoke this time, something cleaner, sharper, familiar in a way that didn't make sense. My gaze drifted toward the window. The glass reflected the room back at me, lamplight, shadows, the edge of the bed, and for a second, just a second, there was something else, a shape behind me. My breath caught. I turned. Nothing. The room stood exactly as it had been, still, silent, empty. But the feeling didn't leave, that quiet awareness that I wasn't alone in the way I thought I was. I stepped back toward the desk, slower now, more deliberate. My eyes dropped to the paper again. "You're asking the wrong question." The words settled deeper this time, not as a warning, as a direction. And suddenly, the answer felt closer. Not clear, not safe, but closer. I picked up my pen, hesitated, then beneath the typed line, I wrote one question. Just one. Who wanted him gone? The ink hadn't even dried when a knock, soft, precise, not loud enough to startle, just enough to demand attention. My head lifted. The door remained closed, the lock still turned. The silence on the other side stretched just long enough to feel intentional. Then his voice, low, controlled, familiar now in a way I didn't trust. "Miss Vale?" I didn't answer. Not immediately, because something inside me had already begun to shift. Not fear, not curiosity, something sharper. Choice. "You should open the door," he said. Not a command, not quite, but close enough. My gaze dropped once more to the paper on the desk, then to the question I had written beneath it. Who wanted him gone? The air in the room felt thinner now, tighter, like the answer was already here, waiting. I moved toward the door, slowly, deliberately, my hand lifted to the handle, paused, and in that pause, for the first time since I arrived, I understood something clearly. This wasn't about uncovering the truth, it was about surviving it. My fingers tightened slightly around the handle. The metal felt cold against my skin, real, grounding. On the other side of the door, he waited. Inside the room, something else might be, and somewhere in between, The truth had already begun to close in. I turned the handle, just enough to break the seal, not enough to open it fully. A breath of air slipped through the gap, cool, quiet, unforgiving, and his voice followed it, lower now, closer. "You're not the only one asking questions anymore." The words settled into the space between us, not as a threat, as a promise. I didn't open the door further. I didn't close it either. I just stood there, between two sides I no longer understood, and for the first time, I didn't know which one was more dangerous. Haunting final line. Some doors don't separate you from the truth. They trap you inside it.